The mountain air bit through Staff Sergeant Alexis Reaper, Morgan's torn uniform as consciousness slowly returned. Her head throbbed where the rifle butt had connected, but her Cherokee grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. Pain is just information, little wolf. Listen to what it tells you, then set it aside. Through swollen eyes, Alexis surveyed her surroundings. Stone walls, a single barred window showing the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, and the acrid smell of kerosene mixed with unwashed bodies. The compound was larger than intelligence had suggested. She could hear at least 15 different voices echoing through the corridors, speaking in rapid Pashto and Arabic. "The American medic awakens." Commander Rashid Hassan's voice carried a cruel satisfaction as he entered the cell. A tall man with calculating eyes and graying beard, he wore the confidence of someone who had broken many prisoners before her. "Your rangers abandoned you quite quickly, didn't they?" Alexis remained silent, her grandfather's training kicking in. Colonel James Morgan had spent 30 years with Special Forces, and his lessons were carved into her soul. In captivity, every word is a weapon they can turn against you. Make them earn every syllable. Hassan circled her like a predator, studying her medical patches and the small dream catcher her grandmother had sewn into her sleeve, barely visible unless you knew where to look. "A healer," he mused. "How ironic. You patch up your soldiers so they can kill more of my people. Today, you will serve a different purpose." The terrorist leader gestured to 2 guards. "Take her to the propaganda room. The world will see what happens to American women who dare enter our lands." As rough hands hauled her upright, Alexis memorized every detail. 12-foot ceilings, 3 guards in this room, 2 exits, weapons poorly maintained but functional. Her Cherokee blood sang with ancient hunting instincts, while her medical training cataloged weak points. The guard on her left favored his right leg. Old injury. The one on her right breathed shallowly. Possible chest trauma. Hassan himself moved with the stiffness of lower back problems. The propaganda room was a converted storage space with a single camera and harsh lighting. Hassan positioned himself behind the lens, his theatrical voice booming. "People of America, your soldiers are not the heroes your government claims. This medic will confess to war crimes, or she will serve as an example of what awaits all invaders." Alexis met the camera's eye with steady defiance. In the corner of the frame, she spotted something Hassan had missed, a ventilation grate, approximately 18 inches square. Her grandmother had taught her to move through spaces half that size while hunting in the Cherokee National Forest. "I am Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, United States Army," she said clearly. "Service number 47381592. My unit designation is classified." Hassan's backhand cracked across her cheek, but Alexis barely flinched. The pain joined the symphony of information her body was gathering. Wind direction from the grate, guard rotation patterns audible through the walls, the metallic taste that meant her split lip was already beginning to clot. "You will tell us about Operation Redwood," Hassan demanded. "Your unit's mission parameters, troop movements, everything." "Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan," she repeated. "Service number 47381592. The interrogation continued for 3 hours, but Hassan's frustration grew with each repetition of her name and number. Finally, he gestured dismissively to his men. "Take her back to the cell. Let hunger and isolation soften her resolve. Tomorrow we try again." As they dragged her through the corridors, Alexis's trained mind mapped the compound. Main corridor running east-west, 4 branch passages, 2 stairwells leading to what sounded like sleeping quarters above. Kitchen smells from the south wing. Weapons storage, based on the metallic echoes, somewhere to the north. 15 visible guards, possibly more. Her cell was a converted storage room with walls of fitted stone. No mortar between the blocks, traditional construction that relied on weight and precision. Her grandfather's engineering knowledge merged with Cherokee stonecraft passed down through generations. These walls had been built to last centuries, but they also had weaknesses. Night fell like a black curtain across the mountains. Through the barred window, Alexis could see guard towers silhouetted against stars that looked exactly like the ones over her grandmother's cabin in North Carolina, the same constellations her Cherokee ancestors had used to navigate these very mountains centuries before the Taliban ever existed. Guard rotation happened every 4 hours. 2 men at her door, voices she was beginning to recognize. Ahmed spoke with a slight lisp, dental issues that would affect his bite strength. Kareem coughed regularly, probably a smoker with compromised lung capacity. At 0300 hours, When human alertness naturally reached its lowest ebb, Alexis began her work. The stone blocks were massive, but the corner where two walls met showed signs of settling. Working with fingertips her grandmother had trained to identify medicinal plants by touch alone, Alexis found what she was looking for: a keystone block that had shifted slightly over decades of mountain weather. Using a technique her Cherokee great-grandfather had taught for harvesting stone tools, she began working the block loose, not by force, that would create noise, but by understanding the rock's natural stress patterns and encouraging it to move along lines it wanted to follow anyway. 2 hours before dawn, the block shifted free. The gap was narrow, but Alexis had learned to move like water through impossible spaces. Her medical training helped her understand exactly how to compress her ribcage, how to angle her shoulders, how to use controlled breathing to make her body smaller. She emerged into a narrow corridor between the outer wall and inner chambers, a maintenance space the builders had included for repairs. Her Cherokee ancestors had built similar hidden passages in their mountain strongholds. Now came the most dangerous part: moving through absolute darkness, guided only by air currents and the subtle acoustic mapping her grandmother had taught her during midnight hunts. Alexis began her reconnaissance. Every step was placed with the precision of a deer crossing dry leaves, weight distributed, balance maintained, breathing controlled. The weapons cache was exactly where the metallic echoes had suggested, but what Hassan didn't know was that Alexis hadn't just trained as a combat medic. Her grandfather's special forces background had included combat demolitions, and those skills had been passed down alongside Cherokee hunting techniques. She selected her tools carefully: det cord, a small amount of C4, and timer mechanisms, but her real weapons would be subtlety and patience. This wouldn't be an explosion. It would be a series of carefully orchestrated accidents. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Alexis was back in her cell, the stone block repositioned. To casual observation, nothing had changed, but Hassan's compound was now a trap waiting to spring, and the Cherokee hunter was no longer prey. Dawn prayers echoed through the compound as Hassan's men began their daily routines, unaware that death had already moved among them in the darkness. Alexis sat in her cell, appearing weak and defeated while her mind catalogued every sound, every voice, every footstep that painted an increasingly detailed picture of her enemy's patterns. Ahmed and Karim brought her breakfast: stale bread and bitter tea. "Eat," Ahmed commanded in broken English. "Commander Hassan wants you strong for today's questioning." Alexis accepted the meager meal with apparent gratitude, but her attention focused on Ahmed's breathing. The guard's slight wheeze had worsened overnight. The high altitude was affecting his compromised respiratory system more than he realized. At 800 hours, Hassan arrived with his camera crew, confident in his control of the situation. "Today, medic, you will be more cooperative. My men have prepared persuasive arguments." The interrogation room had been reconfigured with instruments designed for maximum psychological impact: electrical cables, cutting implements, a brazier heating metal rods to glowing orange. Hassan had clearly studied American military resistance training protocols, but what he hadn't studied was Cherokee psychological warfare. "You know," Alexis said quietly, meeting Hassan's eyes, "my grandmother used to tell stories about men like you." Hassan paused, intrigued despite himself. "Stories?" "Warriors who thought their strength came from fear, who believed controlling others made them powerful." Alexis's voice carried the cadence of ancient storytelling. She said they always made the same mistake, which was, they forgot that some spirits can't be caged. Hassan's laugh was forced, but Alexis caught the micro-expression of uncertainty that flickered across his face. Psychological pressure worked both ways, and she had just planted a seed of doubt. The session continued for hours, but Hassan's techniques were textbook torture, designed for quick results against untrained prisoners, against someone who had endured Cherokee endurance rituals and Special Forces resistance training. They were merely another form of information gathering. By midday, Alexis had memorized the electrical system's layout based on wire positions, identified 3 more guards by their voices and footsteps, and noted that Hassan's confidence was beginning to crack. "Return her to the cell," he finally ordered. "Double the guard. She's more resilient than expected." As they dragged her back through the corridors, Alexis observed her first success. Ahmed was breathing harder, his wheeze more pronounced. The altitude was combining with what appeared to be a developing respiratory infection. By tomorrow, he would be significantly compromised. That evening, as darkness settled over the mountains, Alexis began Phase 2. Working through the loose stone block with movements so subtle they wouldn't register on audio surveillance, she accessed the maintenance corridor, and began her ghost work. Her target wasn't the guards themselves. It was their equipment, their food, their sense of security. Moving through the compound like smoke, she made microscopic adjustments that would cascade into major problems. A few drops of her own saliva, carrying whatever bacteria her system was fighting off, into the guard's water supply. Stress fractures encouraged in weight-bearing equipment. Electrical connections loosened just enough to cause intermittent failures. The Cherokee had perfected psychological warfare centuries before it had a name. They understood that an enemy who questioned his own senses was already defeated. Day 3 brought visible results. Ahmed was running a fever. His breathing labored. 3 other guards showed signs of the same respiratory infection. Close quarters and poor sanitation had accelerated the spread. The electrical system was experiencing random failures that made Hassan's men jumpy and suspicious of each other. During the morning interrogation, Hassan's confidence had eroded noticeably. "You are doing this somehow," he accused, his voice tight with paranoia. "These coincidences, they are not natural." Alexis maintained her facade of weakness but allowed a small smile to touch her lips. "My grandmother said mountain spirits don't like invaders. Superstitious nonsense. Is it?" Alexis met his eyes directly. "How many of your men are sick today, Commander? How many systems are failing? When did you last have a full night's sleep?" Hassan's hand trembled slightly as he raised it to strike her, the first crack in his psychological armor. Behind him, 2 guards exchanged worried glances. That night, Alexis escalated. Instead of returning to her cell, she remained in the maintenance corridors as a massive thunderstorm rolled across the mountains. The stone passages amplified every rumble of thunder into a supernatural symphony, and she used the sound cover to access the compound's communication center. Her medical training included field communications, knowing how to call for medevac or coordinate with supporting units. But her grandfather's special forces background had taught her how to disrupt enemy communications while leaving no obvious evidence of sabotage. Working by touch in absolute darkness, she introduced subtle signal degradation into Hassan's radio equipment. Not enough to cause complete failure, but sufficient to make every transmission unreliable, every communication suspect. By morning, Hassan's network was beginning to fracture. "Sir," one of his lieutenants reported nervously, "we've lost contact with the western outposts. All transmissions are garbled or cutting out." "Equipment failure," Hassan snapped, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "And the men are talking, sir, about the American woman. They think she's—" "What?" "Speak. They think she's bringing bad fortune. 7 men sick, equipment failing, strange sounds in the walls at night." Hassan's eyes found Alexis through the cell bars. She sat in apparent meditation, but her slight smile suggested she had heard every word. "Increase security," he ordered. "Triple the guard on her cell." But that night, one of the tripled guards, a young fighter named Malik, reported something that sent ice through the remaining men's veins. "I saw her, Commander," he whispered. "Through the cell bars, she was sitting in the center of the room, but there was no one there. Just shadow and moonlight." Hassan struck the boy across the face. "Impossible. You were hallucinating." But privately, the terrorist leader was beginning to question his own perceptions. The American medic should have been broken by now. Instead, his compound was falling apart around him, while she remained serene and unshaken. That night, as rain hammered the mountains and lightning split the sky, Hassan stood at his window and wondered if he had captured a soldier or awakened something far more dangerous. In her cell, Alexis continued her patient work, knowing that the most effective hunter was one who made her prey defeat itself. The Cherokee spirits weren't the only things that had awakened in these mountains. The 4th morning brought Hassan's world to the edge of collapse, though he didn't yet comprehend how completely his prisoner had outmaneuvered him. 9 of his men were now bedridden with respiratory infections. The compound's electrical systems failed every few hours, and radio communications had degraded to the point where his network was effectively blind. Standing at his office window, Hassan watched his remaining healthy guards patrol with obvious nervousness. They jumped at shadows, whispered about the American medic's spirit powers, and several had requested transfers to other cells, anything to get away from the compound. "Commander," his lieutenant Farid approached cautiously. "We have a problem." Hassan didn't turn from the window. "Another equipment failure?" "No, sir. It's about the prisoner's cell." Now Hassan spun around, his face tight with anxiety he could no longer hide. "What about it?" Farid shifted uncomfortably. "Malik was on guard duty at 300 hours. He swears he looked through the bars and saw nothing. Empty cell. But when he called for backup and we checked, She was there, sitting exactly where she always sits. Malik is sick with fever. Hallucinations. Sir, Malik isn't sick. And Ahmed reported the same thing 2 nights ago. The cell appears empty. Then suddenly she's there. Hassan's jaw tightened. You're telling me our prisoner can become invisible? I'm telling you what the men are reporting, sir. And there's more. Go on. The sounds in the walls, they're not random anymore. They follow patterns. Like someone moving through the structure itself. Hassan felt the first tendrils of real fear creeping up his spine, but forced his voice to remain steady. Bring her to the interrogation room. Now. When they dragged Alexis before him 20 minutes later, Hassan studied her with new eyes. She appeared unchanged. The same torn uniform, the same controlled demeanor, the same small dream catcher barely visible on her sleeve. But something indefinable had shifted in her presence. What are you? He asked quietly. Alexis met his gaze without flinching. Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, service number 473-81592. No. Hassan leaned forward. What are you? For a long moment, the only sound was the distant coughing of sick guards and the buzz of failing fluorescent lights. Then Alexis spoke, her voice carrying undertones that seemed to resonate through the stone walls themselves. I am the granddaughter of wolves who ran these mountains when your ancestors were still learning to make fire. I am trained by men who could disappear into jungle so completely that the enemy forgot they existed. I am a healer who understands that death and life are 2 sides of the same blade. Hassan's hand moved unconsciously to the pistol at his belt. Superstitious nonsense. Then why are your hands shaking, Commander? Hassan looked down and saw, to his horror, that they were indeed trembling. You're doing this somehow. Poisoning my men, sabotaging equipment, from a locked cell, under constant guard? Alexis tilted her head slightly. How do you think I manage that? I don't know, but, or maybe, Alexis interrupted softly, you captured something you shouldn't have. Maybe these mountains remember older laws than the ones you follow. The lights flickered and died for 30 seconds. Plunging the room into darkness. When they buzzed back to life, Hassan found himself staring at empty space where his prisoner had been sitting. Find her, he screamed, spinning around. Find her now! But Alexis was standing exactly where she had been, unchanged and unmoving. I didn't go anywhere, Commander. Hassan's remaining composure shattered. He pulled his pistol and pressed it to her forehead. End this. Whatever you're doing, end it now. I'm not doing anything, Alexis replied calmly. But the mountains are, and they're almost done with you. That evening, Hassan's paranoia reached critical mass. He stationed 6 guards around Alexis's cell, installed additional lighting, and demanded hourly reports on her location and activities. But his precautions only accelerated the psychological collapse of his remaining men. At 2100 hours, 3 guards simultaneously reported seeing Alexis in different locations throughout the compound. At midnight, the main generator failed for 20 minutes, and when power returned, 2 guards were found unconscious at their posts, alive but catatonic, their eyes wide with terror. By 0200 hours, Hassan had only 4 functional men left. We should kill her, Farid whispered. End this madness. No, Hassan replied, though his voice carried no conviction. She has intelligence value. We need... A scream echoed through the compound, pure animalistic terror that raised every hair on Hassan's body. They found one of the perimeter guards collapsed outside the main gate, babbling incoherently about shadow wolves with human eyes. When they checked Alexis's cell, she was sitting in meditation, apparently unaware of the chaos erupting around her. She's breaking them psychologically, Farid realized. Somehow she's inside their heads. But Hassan was beyond rational analysis. The accumulated stress, sleep deprivation, and inexplicable events had pushed him past his breaking point. Bring her to the roof, he ordered. We'll execute her at dawn, broadcast it live, show the world what happens to American witches. As his remaining men prepared for the dawn execution, Hassan stood alone in his office, staring at intelligence files that no longer made sense. According to every document, Alexis Morgan was exactly what she appeared to be, a combat medic with standard military training, no special operations background, no psychological warfare certification, no history of unusual capabilities. Yet somehow, she had destroyed his compound without lifting a finger. Outside, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. In a few hours, this nightmare would be over. Hassan didn't yet realize that for Alexis Morgan, trained in Cherokee patience and Special Forces precision, the nightmare was just beginning. The final phase of her plan was about to unfold. Dawn broke blood red over the Hindu Kush, As Hassan's 4 remaining men prepared for what they believed would be Alexis's execution, they had no way of knowing they were positioning themselves for their own destruction. Hassan stood on the compound's flat roof, his propaganda camera trained on the bound American medic who knelt at the building's edge. Below, the mountain valley stretched away into Afghanistan's brutal beauty, the same terrain where her Cherokee ancestors had learned to become one with stone and shadow. "People of America," Hassan began his final broadcast, his voice carrying brittle authority, "witness the fate of those who invade our lands. This medic thought she could heal your soldiers so they could kill our children. Today she pays the ultimate price." Alexis remained silent, but her eyes tracked every detail. 4 guards, Hassan himself, 2 escape routes, weapon positions. Her medical training automatically cataloged each man's physical condition: exhausted, malnourished, psychologically shattered. Her Cherokee instincts read the wind direction, the sun angle, the acoustic properties of the surrounding peaks. Most importantly, her Special Forces heritage recognized that she was no longer a prisoner. She was a weapon, ready to fire. "Any last words?" Hassan demanded, pressing his pistol to her skull. Alexis spoke quietly, her words barely audible above the mountain wind. "My grandfather always said the most dangerous moment for a hunter is when he thinks he's won." Hassan's finger tightened on the trigger, and Alexis moved. The zip ties binding her hands had been gradually worked loose over the past hour, using micro-movements invisible to exhausted, paranoid guards. As Hassan's attention focused on his camera, she exploded into action, with the fluid precision of a Cherokee warrior and the lethal efficiency of a ranger medic. Her first target was Hassan himself. A rising elbow strike caught him under the chin, snapping his head back and sending his pistol spinning across the roof. Before he could recover, she had claimed the weapon and put 2 round center mass into the nearest guard. The remaining 3 men scrambled for cover, but they were fighting in Alexis's element now. Every lesson her grandfather had taught about combat movement merged with her grandmother's teachings about becoming invisible. She flowed across the rooftop like liquid shadow, using architectural features and the climbing sun's glare to mask her position. Guard number 2 fell to a precision headshot as he tried to flank her position. The 3rd died when he exposed himself trying to retrieve his fallen comrade's weapon, a tactical error that would have gotten him killed in any professional military force. Hassan and his final man, Farid, had taken cover behind a ventilation housing, but they were trapped with nowhere to retreat. The rooftop access was behind Alexis's position, and the building's edge offered only a fatal drop. "Impossible," Hassan whispered, his psychological control finally shattered completely. "You were bound, helpless. I was studying you," Alexis replied, her voice carrying across the roof with deadly calm. "Learning your patterns, your weaknesses, your fears. Every moment you thought you were breaking me down, I was mapping your destruction." She moved again, a controlled advance that used every principle of small unit tactics. Hassan's return fire was wild, desperate, the shooting of a man who had never faced a real warrior. Farid tried to run for the roof access, but made it only 3 steps before Alexis's precision marksmanship dropped him. Hassan found himself alone, his back literally to the wall, facing a woman who had transformed from victim to apex predator. "You killed my men with tricks," he snarled, raising his rifle. "Psychological games, but this is real combat now." "No," Alexis said quietly, advancing with weapon raised. "This is justice." The final exchange lasted less than 3 seconds. Hassan's rifle jammed, a result of the maintenance issues that had plagued all their equipment. Alexis's shot was clean and surgical, dropping him instantly. As silence settled over the rooftop, she quickly secured the area and began her intelligence gathering. Hassan's command post yielded a treasure trove of operational data, cell phone numbers, financial records, planned attack coordinates, and most crucially, the location of a major bombing plot targeting American forces in Kabul. Working with the speed and precision of her medical training, Alexis transmitted everything to U.S. intelligence using Hassan's own equipment. The irony was poetic. His propaganda broadcast had become the means of his network's complete exposure. But her mission wasn't finished. Moving through the compound with the methodical thoroughness her grandfather had drilled into her, she secured additional intelligence and ensured no terrorist could use the facility again. The remaining sick guards were too weak to resist. She left them zip-tied with medical supplies and water, letting military justice handle their fate later. By the time rescue helicopters appeared over the mountain peaks, Alexis had eliminated Hassan's entire operational cell, transmitted critical intelligence that would prevent multiple terrorist attacks, and proven that underestimating a Cherokee warrior trained in Special Forces traditions was a fatal mistake. Standing on the compound's roof as the rescue birds approached, she touched the small dream catcher on her sleeve, a reminder of her grandmother's teachings about patience, precision, and the power of understanding one's true nature. Staff Sergeant Alexis Reaper Morgan had entered the compound as a captured medic. She left it as a legend, the ghost who had dismantled an entire terrorist cell from the inside, using nothing but Cherokee wisdom, Special Forces training, and the unbreakable will of a warrior who refused to be underestimated. The mountains of Afghanistan had witnessed many battles, but few as precisely executed as the quiet war waged by a woman who had learned from her ancestors that the most dangerous hunter is the one her prey never sees coming. In the after-action reports, intelligence analysts would struggle to explain how a single captured soldier had accomplished what entire special operations teams had failed to achieve. But for those who understood the old ways, the Cherokee paths of patience and perception, the Special Forces doctrines of unconventional warfare, there was no mystery. Some spirits, as Alexis's grandmother had always said, simply cannot be caged. And when they break free, they remind the world why their people have survived every attempt at conquest, in every mountain range. Across every generation, the Reaper had harvested her due. 3 months later, Fort Bragg, North Carolina Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan sat in the debriefing room, facing a panel of senior officers who still seemed to struggle with the reality of her after-action reports. Outside the window, the North Carolina pine forests reminded her of home, of her grandmother's cabin where she had first learned to move like smoke through the woods. Sergeant Morgan, the colonel reviewing her case file, spoke carefully. "Your actions during captivity were unprecedented, eliminating 12 hostiles with minimal resources, gathering critical intelligence, and escaping unassisted. It reads like fiction. It was survival, sir. Cherokee survival techniques combined with my military training." "About that," another officer interjected, "we've been reviewing your background. Your grandmother was indeed full Cherokee, and your grandfather served with distinction in Special Forces. But there's no record of you receiving specialized combat training beyond standard medic protocols." Alexis met his gaze steadily. "Some education happens outside official channels, sir. Family traditions, generational knowledge." The panel exchanged glances. Finally, the colonel leaned forward. "Sergeant, we're recommending you for the Silver Star, but we're also recommending you for assignment to a specialized unit, one that could make better use of your particular skill set. I'm happy to serve wherever the Army needs me, sir. This wouldn't be a regular Army assignment. Are you familiar with the Special Activities Division?" Alexis maintained her neutral expression, but internally, she felt her grandfather's approving smile. The old Green Beret had always said that true warriors eventually found their way to where they belonged. "I've heard of them, sir." "Good, because they've heard of you." The elimination of Hassan's cell prevented 3 major attacks and led to the capture of 15 other terrorist operatives. Your intelligence coup has been described as the most significant single-source intelligence gathering in the theater. As the debriefing concluded, and Alexis walked across the base toward her temporary quarters, she pulled out her cell phone and dialed a familiar number. "Grandmother, it's Alexis." "Little Wolf," came the warm voice from the Blue Ridge Mountains. "I felt you calling home. Are you safe?" "I'm safe, and I think I'm finally ready for the next lesson." Her grandmother's laughter carried the wisdom of generations. "Oh, child, you've been teaching yourself lessons I could never give you, but come home soon." The mountains missed their daughter. That evening, as Alexis prepared for sleep in her temporary quarters, she thought about the journey from her grandmother's cabin to the mountains of Afghanistan and back again. The Cherokee path of the warrior wasn't just about combat. It was about understanding that true strength came from connection to something larger than yourself. Her ancestors had walked these paths for centuries, adapting and surviving every challenge thrown at them. She was simply the latest generation to carry forward their wisdom, updated with modern tactics, but rooted in ancient truths. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, she was content to touch the small dream catcher on her nightstand and remember her grandmother's words. "The spirits choose their own warriors, little wolf, and they always choose well." In the mountains of Afghanistan, Hassan's compound stood empty, already being reclaimed by wind and weather. Local stories spoke of the American ghost woman who had destroyed the terrorists from within, but the details grew more mythical with each telling. The truth was simpler and more profound. A Cherokee woman had remembered who she was, and that memory had been more powerful than any weapon her enemies possessed. Some lessons, after all, could only be learned by walking the path yourself, and Staff Sergeant Alexis Reaper Morgan was just getting started.